Meaning of life. Yeah, really. What is the meaning of life? The big question, the unanswerable question. Why not answer it? It is a question that we all have dealt with. I have dealt with the question of meaning of life for a little while now. I think 63 and a half years, because I didn't worry about the meaning of life for the first 6 months of my life. Although I think I was worrying the moment I lost the womb, the moment I was expelled from my mommy's paradise. So maybe I have been worrying about the meaning of life for 64 years less than 6 days. I had come close. I had come close to know the meaning of life. I remember this time that we went with a friend and participated in the Boga Longa in Venezia. The Boga Longa is like a rowing marathon. You go around the entire lagoon of Venice. I don't remember the distance. It's far. You go really far. You go to the farthest corner of the lagoon from San Marco. You go all the way to Burano and come back. And we were thinking doing it in about 3 hours. Nothing incredibly fast. Just take our own time and come to the finish line with the last group, kind of thing. But then the day was a stormy day. It was windy. There were big waves, big swells in the Venice Lagoon, which is inconceivable. And we went for it, and so did many other boats, and some sank, broke. Those long rowing boats that are so fast, well, some of them capsized, and a couple broke, and it was a disaster. It was a challenge, and we took it. And we were rowing and rowing and rowing and rowing and rowed and rowed and rowed, little boat. It took us, I don't remember, I think it was 7, 8 hours. We came in almost last. 7, 8 hours rowing non-stop. Cold, rainy, windy, big swells. And I know somewhere in there, the meaning of life was clear to me. They say that prolonged suffering can bring clarity. I don't recommend it, but there are these images of religious images of martyrdom, the crucifixion, as a extreme suffering reaching a spiritual state, a state of no self. The Jorge practice of the 1,000 cats in China, which is more mythical than anything else. Supposedly the victims of death by 1,000 cats reach a state of bliss. But the point is that I did feel like I knew the meaning of life. And the moment that we came ashore, I forgot what it was. So let's answer it. What's the meaning of life? Why is the question so hard? Why we humor ourselves with the difficulty of this question, and we say the answer is 42, like in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because these computers calculated 42. Is it that obscure? When I ask for the meaning of house, the meaning of tree, I'm taking to a dictionary. When I ask for the meaning of life, I'm taking to a philosopher or a priest or an oracle. Why don't take me to the dictionary? What's the meaning of life according to the dictionary. Well, it gets funny. The dictionary seems to say that the meaning of life is a condition, it's a state, and it has a bunch of characteristics, and the list can get really long. Because the dictionary says life, the condition of life implies growth. So, well, then a crystal can grow. Is that life? So somebody says, well, no, well, but there has to be other things. There has to be continual change. The dictionary, and looking at the end is the last characteristic in the long list is a condition of continual change preceding death. Well, continual change. Change is the universe. Continual change preceding death. But death is a change itself. So life in that sense continues after death because it's continual change. Whatever way we go, either the way of worms, the way of ashes, that's a change. So life continues in that case. And I can hear voices saying, no, that's not right. Life ends. Really? I found this kind of philosophical statement saying that life, if you want to boil it down to one single thing, life uses energy for physical and conscious development. How elegant. Life uses energy for physical and conscious development. So a river is life. A river uses energy, gravitational energy, and a river is constant change. A river may be using the energy for conscious development. The river reaches a rather spiritual state at some point. And this is how sometimes when I think about life and death and meditate about it, I have images that seem to be powerful answers to the question just in an image. And the river is one of them. The river is a constant in my meditations. When I think about being one with everything, I see a river and a tree, and I was fortunate to spend months actually in the last year under a tree by the Rio Negro, the biggest component of the Amazon before it becomes the Amazon. And there I spent a lot of time feeling being one with the river and the tree. I learned to see that there was not really distinction between me and the river. The other day I had a conversation with my parents, and both of them told me some very basic truths, and one of them was this image of the river, how they are rivers and how they have reached the sea. And they made clear that they have reached the sea and are on the way to reaching the sea. And that's the ending, the reaching of the sea. But then when the river reaches the sea, at the same time the river is starting from the headwaters. The river is in a continuum of reaching the sea and starting from the headwaters. And there are other images when I feel or meditate, contemplate. Let me use the word contemplate because meditate sounds like sitting in a very strenuous position for an hour and not thinking of anything. Contemplate. When I contemplate life, another image is that of the sun. If I give you a picture and you see the sun on the horizon, you cannot tell whether that's a sunrise or a sunset. If I give you a video, then you can infer from the movement of the sun that it's a sunrise as opposed to a sunset. But I could give you the video played backwards, and you would think you're seeing one thing you're looking at the other thing, because they are undistinguishable. The sun is in a constant cycle of sunrise and sunset, and we know it's going to come back. If we are really connected with the land, we celebrate every sunrise and we celebrate every sunset too. They are life. They are both life. The sun is not dying every day. The sun is going through a continual change. The basic definition of life. Or that other definition, that life uses energy. The sun is the biggest source of energy in our solar system. The sun is the source of life. The sun is using incredible amounts of energy. I don't remember the number, the trillions of tons of hydrogen that are transformed into helium and tritium and energy every second. So the sun is life, continual change, growth, activity. If I look at the biology textbook, it's going to tell me that life is a being made of cells. Well, maybe that's because that's what the biology book wants to study. I guess the sun is made of cells. The simplest atoms we know, hydrogen, the group and form spots and flare, and maybe a biology book should start with the sun and a Misium at the same time. I had contemplated life. Oh, here's a way to, let's try to answer the question, what is the meaning of life? And we can try to do it by thinking of the opposite. Tell me, what is the opposite of life? I know what you're going to say. What is the opposite of life? Come on, say it. What's the opposite of life? Death. No, that's wrong. Come on, try again. What's the opposite of life? Non-existence? No, the opposite of life is not death. Death is a stage, a transition. Same as birth. When I contemplate birth and death, I have felt birth, my own birth, multiple times through meditation, contemplation. And I have felt how scary birth is. How birth involves sudden change from a state of paradisiacal state where every need of ours is taken care by our mother through the umbilical cord and the placenta. We are connected to her. We are one self with our mothers, by implication with the rest of the universe. We are in a state of no self, perfection. And then there's pushing and squeezing, and we are bursting out into this bright, blinding place, and we cannot breathe. We lose the connection through the umbilical cord to our mothers, and we don't breathe. It's a state of death. It's a deadly experience, birth. But we know it's a change. We learn it's a change, and then we come to appreciate life after much crying and whining and pooping ourselves, sucking our nipples or flesh or rubber. But ultimately, we come to recognize that it was a change. So here we are getting, and so this, if birth is actually an experience of death in many ways and forms, who is to tell that death is not also an experience of birth in many ways and forms? We don't know. There's also the breathing stops, and there's also a change of self. Maybe we are going from a state of self to non-self. Birth was a transition from non-self to self, and now we are going from self to non-self again. Birth and death, sunrise and sunset, arriving to the sea, departing from the headwaters. One and the same. Birth and death are life transitions, stages, windows in this bigger life state. And that state of life is ever present, it's omnipresent. Even at death, even as ashes and worms. We could say the opposite of life is lifeless. Is there anything that is lifeless? Not even a black hole in the universe is lifeless. There's no alive versus death. We're always alive. The universe is always alive. There could be unconsciousness, there could be no self. Death as a form of unconsciousness, a form of no self, a form of unselfishness. Maybe we can speak of life as being the stage when we are selfish. And before birth and after death, we are unselfish. What will happen if the doctor calls and says, your grandfather is now unselfish? As opposed to saying, your grandfather is dead. Maybe the doctor can continue to say your grandfather is dead, but we are the ones who can read that as being unselfish, transitioning into another form. Life is inescapable. And if you feel life carefully, if you listen carefully, life is humming with joy. Life and joy are inescapable. Life and joy and beauty are inescapable. They're one and the same. They're ever present. This morning I woke up and I had in mind the question, what is life? What is the meaning of life? And I felt presences. The presence of many close to me who had gone through change, who are unselfish now, and some who are I have encountered briefly in life directly. Actually, the first person who was present was David, who is a friend through another friend. I had remained friends with David's partner. And David went through life transformation at a very early age. A life that transformed itself earlier than for most people at a young age. And shortly after David went through that transformation, he was present too, and he remembered him bringing this "there is joy" affirmation to my life. And this morning he was then saying the same thing. I cannot describe it. It was a state of tingling, of feeling joy. And then he was joined in that chorus by my own parents, by friends who left, went through change about the same time as David did 2 years ago. My friend Alex, I could see her smiling in that dark room where the Beach Boys were playing. I could see my dear Carmen, who was a great source of solace in my youth, and another friend who suddenly became unselfish because of a stroke. And they were all affirming this simple truth: there is joy. They were all in a joyful state. They were reminding me that joy is always present. We associate birth with joy and associate death with sorrow and grief. But there is joy and sorrow at birth. Again, contemplating birth make us aware that there is sorrow, there is a loss, there's the loss of paradise at birth. But there is joy, there's the joy of seeing life in a different way. And so is death. There is sorrow and there is joy in death. There is the joy of a life lived, no matter how short. But then sorrow can become heavy. It can become grief. The word grief comes from French, from griever, which is basically burden, to be burdened. And I don't think anybody who dies, becomes unselfish, would like us to be burdened by their transition. Yes, we can miss them, be in sorrow like an elephant touching the bones of an old friend. But the elephant is not burdened. The elephant tries to lift the bones, make the bones lighter. All those loved ones who are gone, and there are more and more of them with time, they don't want us to be burdened. They want us to know that joy and life are ever present. The dark and light are joyful and sorrowful. Dark and light are what they are. The emotions we associate with them are undoing. Think of blood. We associate sometimes blood with death because of so many movies where blood is death, injury. We associate so many emotions with blood, and I don't look at when they take blood from my arm, because once I did that and I passed out. I know, but the baby. Because we're afraid it's like the blood being taken from my arm is ceasing life. But that's a construct of our own minds. Blood is beautiful. It's an extraordinarily beautiful color. Blood is life. And shouldn't be spilled in the name of anger or fear. Some say life is a journey because it's continual change. Yes, life is a journey. But then the most extraordinary journeys are those in space, the galaxies and planets and stars, and moving at incredible speeds through distances that are hard to imagine. So that's life. And I know there's sorrow in life, and we have all suffered, and some have suffered more than. It's hard to imagine. There is sorrow in change. But then, what can we do? We must enjoy. We must enjoy life in whatever state we find it. And yes, simple things like a smile, all those loved people, all the loved ones, smile, laugh, embrace, dance with them. That is life. Life is smiling, laughing, embracing, dancing, loving, and yes, dying. They're all life forms. What is the meaning of life? Life is inescapable. Life and joy are inescapable. There's no opposite to life. There's no lifeless. Life is ever present, omnipresent. Life is punctuated by birth and death, which are transitions, stages, windows. And birth and death are one and the same. Death is not the opposite of life. And yes, they can be sorrow, but we can seek joy and make our lives mostly a joyful process. And believe me, I'm not, I've never been a happy guy. But now that I'm myself reaching that state of unselfishness, I smile, and I dance, and I chant, and I love, and yes, I die. But that doesn't end my life. I call that to 246, the meaning of life. Several thoughts and emotions I experienced since I recorded earlier. I visited with the trees, went for a long walk, and so some final notes. In seeking to find the meaning of life, we may look again for opposites to life, like I just saw the opposite of life defined as non-existence. But then what is non-existence? How can anyone or anything be non-existent? Even a black hole exists in space. I was talking about birth and death being stages or transitions. But I got it, I get it now. Birth and death are passages. Birth and death as passages seem closer to the idea of window I was trying to get to earlier. We even say someone passed instead of died. But by then, what we mean is a polite way of still saying dying. But what about if we listen to ourselves and say that someone passed in the whole sense of passing, like going through a passage? In Jungian terms, there is talk of a middle passage, when expectations catch up with the realities of life in the Middle Age, and we go through in mid-age, and we go through a passage. John was talking then about 3 passages: birth, the middle passage, and death. There is also the grievous middle passage: slaves were forced to take from Africa to the Americas. Point is that seeing death as a passage as opposed to a permanent state may offer great solace. I just look at the definition of death in Wikipedia, and the very first phrase is, death is the permanent, irreversible cessation of all biological functions that sustain a living organism. Listen to those words: permanent, irreversible. We know everything is impermanent, nothing is impermanent. Cessation of all biological functions? There's no such thing. Decomposition is a biological function. Say gross if you must, but it is a biological function. You can see how language has cornered us into the idea of the permanence of death and consequent unending grief in its French origin of burden. Griver, to put a burden on, to put a weight on, to hang over, weigh heavy over. Grief. Wouldn't those who have become selfless, the ones who have passed, wouldn't they want us to be happy above anything else? Yes, gloom descends upon us because we dearly missed some. But they rather see us joyful. I mentioned David earlier, and I didn't say how he was like a kid insisting on this "there is joy" statement. He knows I am a monkey, and he was so calling my attention to pass along the message. There is joy. Life is inescapable. Death is not a permanent state, but a passage. Speaking of the dead doesn't make sense. Or it makes as much sense as speaking of the born does. We are born, and then we move on. We are not called the born the rest of our lives. So why do we call those who went through the passage of death, why do we call them the dead? They are not dead. They went through death, but they are not dead. They are still alive because they continue to be part of life. We are alive before being born. We are alive after birth. And we are alive even after death.